Delete everything, Danielle. Every single file, every backup, every trace of your so-called investigation. Bryce Langford's voice cut through the opulent silence of his corner office like a blade. It was a voice I had once associated with inspiration, with the kind of gravitas that built empires. Now, it was laced with a chilling venom that felt foreign and terrifying. I sat across from his vast mahogany desk, a piece of furniture so large it felt more like a fortress than a workstation. My hands were folded calmly in my lap, a small act of defiance against the tremor that threatened to betray my carefully constructed composure. I watched his face, usually a mask of charismatic control, flush a deep, blotchy red with barely contained rage. The man I had admired for 4 years was gone, replaced by this cornered, snarling animal. "You're too emotional to handle confidential information," he spat, the words dripping with condescension. "Women like you can't keep secrets." The sexist trope was so cliché, it was almost laughable, but in that moment, it felt like a slap. He was trying to reduce me, to dismiss the mountain of irrefutable data I had just presented as some sort of hysterical fantasy. He was wrong. My name is Danielle Monroe, and I'm 32 years old. For the past 4 years, I've worked as a forensic compliance analyst at Westbrook Capital Management, here in the gleaming heart of Charlotte, North Carolina. My job, on paper, is simple: monitor trading patterns, investigate suspicious activities, and ensure our firm operates within the labyrinthine web of federal regulations. It's a job that requires a meticulous eye, a patient mind, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. What makes me good at my job, however, isn't just my attention to detail. It's my ability to remain calm when others lose their composure. It's a quiet strength, a stillness I cultivated to survive in the high-testosterone, high-stakes world of finance. A world where a single misplaced decimal point could unravel fortunes and a moment of panic could cost millions. I had learned to be the quiet eye of the storm, the anchor in a sea of chaos. It was a skill that was being tested to its absolute limit right now. For instance, while Bryce paced behind his desk like a caged animal, his expensive Italian loafers sinking into the plush, custom-woven carpet, I remained perfectly still. The evidence I'd compiled over the past 6 agonizing weeks sat between us in a thick manila folder, a silent, damning testament to his crimes. It was more than a folder. It was a Pandora's box I had painstakingly assembled. Inside were trading records, email timestamps, broker communications, and IP address logs, all meticulously documented and cross-referenced. Each page was a nail, and together they built a coffin for his career. The pattern was undeniable, a symphony of corruption conducted with brazen confidence. Someone at Westbrook had been making suspiciously timed trades just days, sometimes hours, before major public announcements that would send stock prices soaring or plummeting. It was insider trading on a scale I had never imagined possible. And the culprit had to be someone with access to the most sensitive, confidential information from our corporate clients. Someone with the power and arrogance to believe they were untouchable. Someone like Bryce Langford himself. "I understand your concerns," I said quietly, my voice a steady, low counterpoint to the tension crackling in the air. I refused to let him see the fear that was a cold knot in my stomach. "But these irregularities need to be reported to the Securities Commission. It's not just company policy, Bryce. It's federal law." Bryce stopped pacing and leaned forward, planting his palms flat against the polished surface of his desk. The movement was aggressive, a predator closing in. The faint scent of his expensive cologne, a scent I once associated with success, now smelled like decay. "Federal law," he sneered, his voice dropping to a low, intimate growl. "Let me tell you about law, sweetheart. The law is that I'm your boss. And when I tell you to delete something, you delete it. No questions asked." The condescension in his voice made my skin crawl, but I kept my expression neutral, my gaze unwavering. I had learned long ago, from watching other women in the industry get chewed up and spat out, that emotional reactions only gave men like Bryce more ammunition. They feed on it, using it to confirm their own prejudiced narratives. Instead, I reached into the leather briefcase at my feet. It was a calculated move, one I had rehearsed in my mind 100 times. I pulled out a second folder, identical to the first, and placed it on the desk with a soft, definitive thud. One he hadn't seen yet. "There's something else," I said, my voice as cool as the glass of the skyscraper window behind him. "I found additional transactions from last month. The Patterson Industries acquisition, the Meridian Energy merger talks, the Silverton Pharmaceuticals announcement. All of them preceded by unusually large position changes in your personal trading account, Bryce." For the first time since I'd entered his office, Bryce fell silent. The angry flush drained from his face, replaced by a pallor that was almost gray. The color seemed to seep out of the room itself, leaving everything in shades of muted fear. His eyes, which had been burning with rage, were now fixed on the second folder, wide and unblinking. I could practically see the frantic calculations running through his mind, the desperate search for an escape route that no longer existed. He was trapped, and we both knew it. "You have no idea what you're playing with," he said finally, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, a last, desperate attempt to intimidate me. "This industry doesn't forgive mistakes, Danielle. Especially from women who think they're smarter than everyone else." But I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when the evidence was this clear. Not when my integrity, the very core of who I was, the principle my schoolteacher parents had instilled in me, was on the line. Growing up in a small town just outside Charlotte, I was always the quiet, observant one. While other kids played with dolls or video games, I found a strange fascination in numbers and patterns. My father, a high school math teacher, used to joke that I was born with a spreadsheet in my brain. I'd spend hours organizing his business receipts for his small tutoring side hustle, creating elaborate charts and finding a deep, satisfying sense of order in the chaos of his paperwork. My parents, both teachers, encouraged my analytical nature. They saw my love for logic not as odd, but as a gift. They pushed me to pursue mathematics in college, and from there, forensic accounting felt like a natural fit. It was the perfect blend of my two passions, finding the truth and imposing order. After earning my degree in forensic accounting from the University of North Carolina, I'd worked my way up through several firms, building a reputation for being thorough, discreet, and unshakably calm. When I landed the compliance position at Westbrook Capital Management 4 years ago, it felt like the pinnacle of my career. The company had a sterling reputation, and Bryce Langford was a legend, a self-made man who had built the firm from nothing into one of the Southeast's most respected investment powerhouses. When he offered me the compliance position, I thought I'd found my dream job. Bryce had been utterly charming during our initial interviews, praising my attention to detail and promising me complete autonomy in my investigations. "I want someone who isn't afraid to ask tough questions," he'd told me, his smile warm and reassuring. "Someone who will keep us honest." Back then, I'd admired his confidence and vision. He seemed like the kind of leader who genuinely valued integrity above profit.
How naive I'd been.
The first red flag had appeared about 6 months into my tenure. I'd noticed some unusual trading patterns in our emerging markets portfolio, small enough to be dismissed as coincidences, but strange enough to prickle at my intuition. But when I brought my concerns to Bryce, he dismissed them with a casual wave of his hand. "You're being too cautious, Danielle," he'd said, that charming smile still in place. "This is how big players operate. You'll understand when you've been in the industry longer." I'd accepted his explanation then, chalking it up to my own inexperience. I wanted to believe him, but similar incidents kept occurring. Trades that seemed too perfectly timed. Information that appeared to leak just before major announcements. Profits that defied market logic. Each time, I'd document it. Each time, I'd consider bringing it up again, but his patronizing dismissal echoed in my ears. At first, I tried to give Bryce the benefit of the doubt. Maybe these were just coincidences. Maybe I was reading too much into normal market fluctuations. But as the patterns became more frequent and more obvious, I couldn't ignore them anymore. The gnawing unease in my gut grew into a cold, hard certainty. This wasn't a series of lucky guesses. It was a calculated scheme. The breaking point had come 3 weeks ago, during a company-wide meeting. Bryce had been discussing our upcoming quarterly earnings, and he'd made an offhand comment about staying ahead of the curve on the Patterson Industries deal. The problem was, Patterson Industries hadn't announced their acquisition plans yet. That information wouldn't become public for another 4 days. It was a small slip, a moment of unguarded arrogance, but for me, it was a klaxon horn. I'd started my real investigation that same afternoon. The work became my obsession. I spent countless late nights in my quiet office, the city lights of Charlotte twinkling below, feeling like a lone detective in a film noir. I pulled trading records, cross-referencing them with public announcement dates. I dug into server logs, tracking IP addresses for after-hours access to sensitive client files. What I'd found was a systematic pattern of insider trading spanning at least 18 months, netting millions of dollars in illegal profits. It was evidence that could send Bryce to federal prison for years. The smart thing to do would have been to keep quiet, to look the other way and protect my career. Bryce had connections throughout the industry. He could make my life very difficult if I crossed him. But staying silent would make me complicit in his crimes. My father had always taught me that integrity wasn't negotiable. Do the right thing, he'd say, even when it's the hard thing. Today, in Bryce's office, I was choosing to do the hard thing. And now he was trapped. I had presented him with the first folder, and then the second, watching his carefully crafted world begin to crumble. "I need time to think about this," Bryce said, his voice strained as he finally pushed himself away from the desk. He closed the second folder, without looking at its contents. His voice had lost its earlier aggression, replaced by something that sounded almost like resignation. But it was a trick, a feigned retreat. "I should have known he was lying," I recounted to Jessica later. The way his eyes darted toward his computer screen, the nervous drumming of his fingers on the desk, the forced, casual tone, all classic signs of deception. Some part of me, the naive part that still wanted to believe in the man who hired me, still wanted to believe that my boss, the man I'd respected for years, would do the right thing when confronted with undeniable evidence. "Of course," I said in his office, standing up from my chair. "I'll keep the files secure over the weekend. We should probably schedule a meeting with legal on Monday morning to discuss proper reporting procedures." Bryce nodded absently, already reaching for his phone.
Yes.
"Legal. Good idea. Have a nice weekend, Danielle." I gathered my things and headed for the door, but something made me pause at the threshold. A cold premonition. When I looked back, Bryce was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was cold, calculating, almost predatory. It sent a chill down my spine. "Bryce," I said, my voice a little shaky. "Is everything all right?" The mask of the charming CEO slipped back into place so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Everything's fine," he said, with a forced, tight smile. "Just thinking about how to handle this situation properly. You know how delicate these matters can be." That weekend, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Very wrong. I had made copies of all the evidence, of course. Keeping backup files was standard procedure in compliance work, a professional habit that had just become my lifeline. But Bryce's reaction had been too calm, too controlled. Men like him didn't usually accept defeat so gracefully. On Sunday evening, on a hunch, I decided to drive past the office. I told myself I was just being paranoid, but the cold feeling from Friday hadn't left me. As I pulled into the deserted parking garage, I saw Bryce's gleaming black BMW in its usual spot. The lights were on in his office on the 32nd floor.
He was there.
I sat in my car for 20 minutes, my heart pounding, watching that single lit window and trying to decide what to do. He was destroying the evidence. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. Finally, I pulled out my phone and called my old college roommate, Jessica. She'd gone on to become a sharp, successful securities lawyer in Washington. "Jess, it's Danielle. I need some advice," I said when she picked up. It's almost 10 p.m. on a Sunday, she laughed. This must be serious. It is, I said, and I told her everything. The trading patterns, the evidence I'd gathered, Bryce's reaction, the lights on in his office right now. Jessica listened without interrupting, only occasionally asking for clarification on technical details. Her silence was more comforting than 1,000 platitudes. It was the sound of a brilliant legal mind at work. You need to report this immediately, she said when I finished. Don't wait for Monday. Don't give him time to destroy evidence or create alibis. The Securities Commission has a whistleblower hotline that operates 24 hours a day. But what if I'm wrong? I whispered, the fear I'd been suppressing finally bubbling to the surface. What if there's an explanation I haven't considered? Danielle. Jessica's voice was firm, cutting through my doubt. You've been doing this for 4 years. Trust your instincts. And more importantly, trust your evidence. I hung up and stared at that lit office window, knowing my career at Westbrook Capital Management was about to end. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, perfectly matching my mood. As I walked into the Westbrook building for what I suspected might be the last time, I'd spent most of Sunday night copying files to encrypted drives, following Jessica's meticulous instructions on proper evidence preservation. Everything was now stored in multiple secure locations, including a safety deposit box at my bank. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt longer than usual. When the doors opened, I was surprised to find the hallways unusually quiet. Normally, Monday mornings buzzed with activity as traders prepared for the opening bell. But today felt different. Subdued. I made my way to my office, a small but well-appointed space overlooking the city's financial district. My desk was exactly as I'd left it Friday evening. Computer locked, files secured, family photos arranged neatly beside my monitor. Everything appeared normal, which somehow made me even more nervous. At exactly 9 a.m., my phone rang. It was Bryce's assistant, Patricia. She sounded unusually formal. Miss Monroe, Mr. Langford would like to see you in his office. Immediately.
Of course, I said.
I'll be right there. I grabbed my briefcase, which contained the original copies of all the evidence, and walked down the hall to Bryce's corner office. The door was closed, which was unusual. Bryce prided himself on having an open-door policy. I knocked and waited for his response.
Come in.
Bryce was seated behind his desk, but he wasn't alone. A man in an expensive, ill-fitting suit sat in one of the visitor chairs, his back to me. When he turned around, I recognized him immediately. Gregory Holt, Westbrook's head of human resources. My stomach dropped. Danielle, please have a seat, Bryce said, gesturing to the empty chair beside Gregory. His tone was businesslike, almost cold. This was not the man who'd seemed so rattled on Friday afternoon. I sat down carefully, keeping my briefcase clutched close to my side.
Good morning, Bryce.
Gregory, is this about our discussion on Friday? Gregory cleared his throat and opened a thick folder on his lap. Miss Monroe, we've had some time over the weekend to review your recent performance and conduct. Unfortunately, we've identified several concerning issues that require immediate action. My heart began racing, but I kept my voice steady. What kind of issues? Unauthorized access to confidential files, Bryce said, his eyes never leaving mine. Violation of company security protocols. Inappropriate disclosure of sensitive information to outside parties. The accusations hit me like physical blows. That's completely false, I said, my voice rising slightly despite my best efforts. Everything I accessed was within the scope of my job responsibilities. I haven't disclosed anything to anyone outside the company. We have evidence suggesting otherwise, Gregory said, pulling out several printed emails. These communications with your friend, Jessica Martinez, at the Securities Commission indicate. Jessica Martinez? I interrupted, a cold, sickening realization washing over me. They had been watching me. They had hacked my emails. I don't know anyone by that name. My friend Jessica is Jessica Rivers, and she's a private practice attorney, not a government employee. Bryce and Gregory exchanged a meaningful look. I realized then they were trying to build a case, a flimsy, fabricated narrative that I'd been leaking information to federal investigators. The problem with their story was that it wasn't true, and in their haste, they'd gotten the basic facts wrong. Regardless, Bryce continued, his voice smooth as oil, your recent behavior has demonstrated a lack of judgment and professionalism that we cannot tolerate. Effective immediately, your employment with Westbrook Capital Management is terminated. The words hung in the air like smoke. I'd expected this, but hearing it still felt like a punch to the gut. For years of my life, countless late nights and early mornings, all the trust I'd built with colleagues, gone in an instant. I see, I said quietly. And I assume this has nothing to do with the evidence I presented to you on Friday? What evidence? Bryce asked, his expression perfectly, chillingly innocent. You mean those conspiracy theories you were developing? Danielle, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You've become paranoid and erratic. You're seeing patterns that don't exist. I stood up slowly, my briefcase still clutched in my hand. They thought they were clever, firing me before I could report them. They thought removing me from the building would eliminate the threat. They had no idea that the real evidence was already far beyond their reach. I'll need to collect my personal items, I said. Security will escort you, Gregory replied, his tone devoid of any emotion. For everyone's safety. As if on cue, 2 uniformed guards appeared in the doorway. I walked between them with my head held high, knowing that every employee in the office was watching. Let them look. As we walked through the trading floor, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned, whispers followed in our wake. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I was cataloging every face that watched my downfall with obvious satisfaction. These people would remember this moment very differently once the truth came out. The security escort to my office was humiliating by design. Bryce wanted everyone to see me being marched out like a common thief, hoping to discredit me before word of my allegations could spread. In my office, I was allowed to pack only personal items under the guards' watchful eyes. Family photos, a small plant, my coffee mug, innocent objects that told the story of 4 years of my life. The guards inspected everything, making sure I wasn't taking any company property. What about my personal files? I asked one of the guards. I have continuing education certificates and performance reviews in my desk. Nothing leaves this office except what HR specifically approves, he replied mechanically. Company policy. I nodded and continued packing. They didn't realize that all my important documents had been scanned and stored electronically months ago. The physical papers they were so carefully protecting were worthless copies. As I was closing my box of belongings, my computer monitor caught my eye. It was displaying my screensaver, a photo of my parents at their retirement party last year. They looked so proud and happy, completely unaware that their daughter would soon become the center of a federal investigation. I wondered what they'd think when they learned what I was about to do. The walk to the elevator was another parade of stares and whispers. I recognized several colleagues who'd worked with me on various projects over the years. Some looked sympathetic, others curious, a few openly hostile. Human nature in all its complicated glory. In the elevator, one of the guards tried to make small talk. Rough morning, huh? It could be worse, I replied honestly. At least I know I'm doing the right thing. He gave me a strange look, but didn't pursue the conversation. The lobby was mercifully empty except for the receptionist, who avoided eye contact as we passed. Outside, the rain had stopped, and weak sunlight was beginning to break through the clouds. I took it as a good sign. Your access cards and keys, one of the guards said, extending his hand. I handed them over without comment. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car in a parking garage 6 blocks away, finally allowing myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. I'd been fired from a job I loved, expelled from a company I'd helped build, branded as a security risk and a troublemaker. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I pulled out my phone and dialed Jessica's number. She answered on the first ring. How did it go? She asked. Exactly as we expected, I said. I'm officially unemployed as of 30 minutes ago. They tried to accuse me of leaking information to a fictional SEC contact named Jessica Martinez. Jessica laughed, despite the seriousness of the situation. Martinez? Really? They couldn't even get my name right in their fake evidence. Apparently not. Are you ready for phase 2? Absolutely. I've already prepared the filing documents. Everything you sent me over the weekend has been organized and cross-referenced with federal regulations. The Commission's investigative unit is expecting our call. I took a deep breath. Once I made this call, there would be no going back. Bryce would use every connection he had to destroy my reputation. I'd probably never work in compliance again. But some things were more important than career security. Let's do this, I said. Conference call in 5 minutes. And Danielle, Jessica's voice was warm. You're incredibly brave for doing this. I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified and angry, and absolutely certain that I was about to change everything. The Securities Commission's whistleblower hotline was answered by a crisp, professional voice that immediately put me at ease. Enforcement Division, this is Agent Rebecca Stone. How can I help you? Jessica, who was conferenced in from her Washington office, took the lead. Agent Stone, this is Jessica Rivers, attorney for Danielle Monroe. Miss Monroe is reporting systematic insider trading at Westbrook Capital Management in Charlotte, North Carolina. We have extensive documentation spanning 18 months of illegal activity. I see, Agent Stone said. Miss Monroe, can you give me a brief overview of what you've observed? For the next 20 minutes, I laid out everything I'd discovered. The suspicious trading patterns, the impossibly accurate timing of stock purchases, the correlation between Bryce's personal trades and subsequent public announcements. I kept my voice steady and factual, knowing that emotion would only undermine my credibility. Agent Stone asked detailed questions about my methodology, my access to the trading records, and the security measures I'd taken to preserve the evidence. Her questions told me she was taking this seriously. Miss Monroe, she said finally, I want you to know that what you're describing, if true, represents significant violations of federal securities law. The penalties for insider trading can include substantial fines and prison time. I understand, I said. That's why I couldn't stay silent. What's your current employment status with Westbrook? I was terminated this morning, ostensibly for performance issues. In reality, because I refused to destroy the evidence. There was a pause on the line. Were you specifically asked to destroy evidence? Yes. On Friday afternoon, my supervisor explicitly ordered me to delete all files related to my investigation. When I refused, he became hostile and made several inappropriate comments about women in the finance industry. Agent Stone's voice sharpened with interest. Can you provide documentation of those conversations? I have detailed notes from the meeting, including direct quotes. I also have copies of all the trading records, email communications, and supporting documentation. Everything has been preserved according to federal evidence guidelines. Excellent. Miss Rivers, I assume you've advised your client about potential retaliation. Jessica's voice was firm. We've taken appropriate precautions. All evidence has been secured in multiple locations, and Miss Monroe understands the protection available under federal whistleblower statutes. Good. Miss Monroe, I'm going to transfer you to our Charlotte field office. They'll want to meet with you in person as soon as possible, probably within the next 48 hours. Can you make yourself available? Absolutely. One more thing, and this is very important. Do not contact anyone at Westbrook Capital Management. Don't discuss this investigation with current or former employees. Don't return to the building. We need to ensure the integrity of our investigation isn't compromised. After we hung up, I sat in my car, feeling simultaneously exhausted and energized. The wheels were now in motion. Federal investigators would soon be examining every trade, every email, every phone call that had passed through Westbrook systems. Bryce's carefully constructed empire was about to come crashing down. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Heard about this morning.
So sorry.
Call me if you need anything. It was Patricia, Bryce's assistant. She was reaching out, probably worried about her own job security. I wondered how many other employees had noticed irregularities but stayed quiet out of fear. How many had suspected but lacked the evidence or courage to act. I started my car and pulled out of the parking garage, heading home to prepare for whatever came next. In my rearview mirror, I could see the gleaming tower that housed Westbrook Capital Management, its windows reflecting the afternoon sun like golden shields. By the end of the week, those shields would prove to be made of glass. The call came on Thursday morning at exactly 8:47 a.m. I was sitting in my kitchen, nursing my second cup of coffee, and reviewing the documents I'd be presenting to federal investigators later that day. The caller ID showed unknown, but I recognized Agent Stone's voice immediately. Miss Monroe, we've executed search warrants at Westbrook Capital Management. I thought you should know that Mr. Langford has been taken into custody. I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. 3 days. It had taken federal investigators exactly 3 days to gather enough additional evidence to make an arrest. What charges? Insider trading, securities fraud, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation. The obstruction charge relates to his attempt to force you to destroy evidence. The intimidation charge covers his threats to your career and those inappropriate comments about women in the industry. Through my kitchen window, I could see the Westbrook building in the distance. At this very moment, FBI agents were probably going through Bryce's office, seizing computers and files, interviewing terrified employees. The man who'd built a financial empire through illegal trades was now wearing handcuffs. Miss Monroe? Are you there? Yes, sorry. I'm just processing this. There's more. We've frozen approximately $12 million in accounts linked to Mr. Langford's trading activities. The investigation is expanding to include several other firms where he may have accomplices. $12 million. The number was staggering, but it made sense. 18 months of insider trading, leveraged with borrowed capital, compounding illegal gains month after month. Bryce hadn't just been breaking the law, he'd been building a criminal enterprise. What happens next? The investigation continues. We'll need your formal testimony for the grand jury, probably within the next 2 weeks. Miss Rivers can help you prepare for that process. After I hung up, I walked to my window and stared at the Westbrook building. Somewhere in that glass tower, employees were discovering that their respected managing director was actually a federal criminal. Clients were learning that their trusted advisor had been using their confidential information to enrich himself. The reputation Bryce had spent years building was disintegrating in real time. I thought about all the times he'd condescended to me, all the comments about women being too emotional for high-stakes finance. He'd fired me, thinking I was just another disposable employee who could be silenced and discredited. He'd been catastrophically wrong. The news broke at 2 p.m. that same afternoon. Prominent Charlotte investment manager arrested in federal insider trading scheme, read the headline on the Charlotte Observer's website. Within hours, the story had been picked up by the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and every major financial news outlet. I watched the coverage from my living room, feeling surreal as reporters discussed the case I'd helped build. They interviewed former SEC officials about the significance of the charges, legal experts about potential sentences, and industry analysts about the impact on Westbrook's clients. This appears to be one of the most systematic insider trading schemes the Commission has uncovered in recent years, one expert told a CNN reporter. The preliminary evidence suggests profits in the tens of millions over an extended period. My phone had been ringing constantly since the news broke. Former colleagues, friends from college, reporters who'd somehow gotten my number. I ignored them all, except for one call from my parents. Danielle, we just saw the news, my mother said, her voice tight with worry. Are you safe? Are you involved in this somehow? I explained what I could without compromising the ongoing investigation. My parents listened in stunned silence as I described Bryce's illegal activities and my decision to report them. "We're so proud of you," my father said finally. It must have been terrifying to stand up to someone with that much power. It was, I admitted, but staying silent would have made me complicit in his crimes. "Your father always said integrity isn't negotiable," my mother added. "I'm glad you remembered that." At 6 p.m., the local news ran a story about Westbrook's clients rushing to withdraw their investments. The stock market had already responded, with financial sector stocks dropping across the board as investors worried about the broader implications of the scandal. By evening, Westbrook Capital Management had suspended all trading activities and hired a crisis management firm. The company Bryce had built was collapsing as rapidly as his criminal scheme had been exposed. I felt no satisfaction in watching the firm's destruction. Too many innocent employees would lose their jobs. But I felt vindicated, knowing that justice was finally being served. Tomorrow, the real work would begin, as federal prosecutors built their case, and I prepared to testify about everything I'd witnessed. 6 months later, I was sitting in a conference room at Thornfield Legal Partners, one of Charlotte's most prestigious law firms. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as I reviewed the final terms of my new employment contract. Bryce Langford had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $14 million in restitution. His co-conspirators at 3 other firms had received similar sentences. The Westbrook investigation had grown into the largest insider trading case in the Southeast's history. "Director of Forensic Compliance," I said, reading my new title aloud. I liked the sound of that. Margaret Thornfield, the firm's founding partner, smiled across the table. "You've earned it. What you did took tremendous courage. And frankly, the industry needs more people like you in positions of authority." My new role would involve overseeing compliance across multiple hedge funds and investment firms, implementing the kind of monitoring systems that could have caught Bryce's scheme much earlier. I'd also be working with federal regulators to develop new industry standards. The irony wasn't lost on me that Bryce's attempt to silence me had actually amplified my voice. His criminal behavior had made me one of the most sought-after compliance experts in the country. As I signed the contract, I thought about the young woman who'd walked into Westbrook 4 years ago, eager to please and afraid to make waves. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that doing the right thing sometimes meant risking everything. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Saw the announcement about your new job. Congratulations. You've officially made the transition from whistleblower to industry reformer." I smiled and typed back, "Thanks. Ready to change this industry from the inside out." The truth was, I was more than ready. I was determined to ensure that what happened at Westbrook could never happen again, and I finally had the platform and the authority to make that vision a reality. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply refusing to let the bad guys win.